Location, Chapter 7 of Underlord. Spoiler warning. Authorization required. If you have not read Cradle, Volume 10, Reaper, you are not authorized to proceed beyond this point. Enter spoiler territory at your own risk. You have been warned. The inert heavens drops hovered before Ethan, gray and lifeless, and he savored the moment. He always enjoyed messing with Lindon. He projected his voice so that he could be heard in every corner of the barn in which they'd gathered. If only someone had access to a substance that strengthens and refines the soul, one that might be prepared in a monarch's pocket world, for instance. Lindon deflated in resignation, and Ethan's smile widened. The boy's reactions were too much fun, so Ethan continued. Some kind of, let's say, spirit-enhancing water. Wearily, Lindon pulled the void key from around his neck. Please, I understand. He and Yaren exchanged a glance as though they shared a secret. Adorable. He had withdrawn spirit well water for Yaren's benefit at least a dozen times over the last 2 months, not to mention all the sips he'd stolen for himself. Ethan approved of the instincts to keep such a treasure secret, but how had Lindon expected to keep it from Ethan? Most likely, Lindon saw it as a kind of test or a challenge for Ethan's abilities. Perhaps he'd expected Ethan to mention it, only to grow bolder when Ethan remained silent. This would be a good lesson for him. Keeping secrets from his teacher was the definition of futility. I promised this to Yaren, Lindon said. This is her decision to make. Accordingly, Ethan addressed himself to Yaren. Would you allow me to use the remainder of this water? I assure you we will be maximizing its benefits. She chewed on her lips as she weighed her words, but Ethan knew she would agree. It was all theater at this point. After a few seconds, she speared him with a look. Just so you know, I'd contend that Cassius had a good point. It really scrapes you raw dealing with somebody who always knows best. Their reactions did brighten his day. No matter how much they sighed, they played along with him. Who could ask for more than that? What about when they really do know best? Ethan asked, as Lindon took the water from his void key. Orthos snorted out smoke. Even worse. Lindon handed over the bottles and spoke apologetically. I should have known you'd see the key. I tried to respect your desire not to discuss it, but now that it's all out in the open, let me say you have truly exceeded my expectations. Strengthening your body like that must have been painful. Ghostwater was a treasure trove for you, but I know it pushed you to your limits. I could not be more proud of my disciple. Like a flower under sunlight, Lindon bloomed with the praise. He hadn't gotten enough of that as a child. He deserved more. Well, more was easy because Ethan meant every word. He knew firsthand what it must have taken to push through what Lindon had endured in Northstrider's pocket laboratory. Even the gifts Lindon had received were not easy to bear. The average sacred artist would never have the opportunity to learn it, but gaining benefits beyond one station was not just difficult to achieve, it was difficult to have. Merely adapting to increased speed or strength could be disorienting, even unpleasant, and that was nothing compared to the mental and emotional toll adjusting to spiritual change could take. Even Lindon likely didn't realize it, but he had borne those gifts with an attitude and a will even Osmanthus Aurelius would admire. So Ethan continued lavishing him with praise. And quickening your mind, I had a 16-step plan for perfecting you as a gold, but I couldn't believe it when I saw you move. Mental enhancement at gold is a rare and valuable thing. You have a stronger foundation than I ever dared to hope, and thanks to Northstrider, we're ahead of schedule. There existed dozens of methods for supplementing the thoughts of a sacred artist. From the mundane, adding dream constructs to speed thought or hold memories, to the needlessly complex, like developing mental enforcer techniques. Northstrider's attempts to enhance the interface between the brain and the spirit had clearly worked, at least on Lindon, which pleased Ethan to no end. To have such infrastructure in place before his first soulfire baptism would produce endless benefits at Underlord and above. It would eventually be like having a mental enforcer technique active at all times, which could cut as much as 5 years off Ethan's projected training plan. Once you reach Underlord, Ethan said, then your real training can finally— Lindon didn't seem as pleased with this round of training. He looked somewhat distracted, or even as though he thought Ethan had said something wrong. Before Ethan could finish his sentence, a spirit popped out of Lindon's soul. A purple, one-eyed spirit with a pair of tendrils and a somewhat hesitant smile, and a fully developed Madra system of its own, an independent, manifested spiritual entity operating in symbiosis with Lindon's mind. Ethan lost the rest of the room. all his spiritual and bloodline senses focused on the mind spirit. This was so much more than he had ever expected, ever imagined, ever dared to hope. Like sensing the marble on Lindon, only to realize it had come directly from Suriel. Ethan found, to his own surprise, that he was speaking to the living construct itself. I had no idea. Even now, if I couldn't see you before me, I would have no idea there was a spirit inside him. With a fully formed consciousness and madra system, tied to— His mouth stopped working again. If he'd had access to the full breadth of his original soul-smithing knowledge, he would have seen the truth immediately. Instead, he'd been forced to derive the truth slowly, one bit of information at a time, before he arrived at the ultimate conclusion. How could a mere construct have been brought truly to life rather than imitating such? How could it add to Lindon rather than leeching such energy from him that it became a burden to maintain? It was tied to the way. Tied to his brain, Ethan finished, when he realized he had been quiet for too long. This was the territory of the Sage of the Silver Heart, beneath the Monarch of Endless Night. He had to be very, very careful what he said, and the fewer ears, the better. He'd never forgotten about the workers bustling around him, setting up Fisher Gesch's foundry in the barn, but he began gesturing wildly at them to leave. "Fisher, would you clear the area for us, please?" She said something snappy, no doubt cutting, but Ethan reached randomly into his void key and withdrew an entire sack of something that was probably valuable. He tossed a bag of scales from his pocket, forged another scale, and almost threw his void key itself at her. Buying her business, her family, her silence, and half of the Black Flame Empire itself wouldn't be too much if it meant keeping this even a little quieter. Fisher Gesche choked at the sight of the wealth he'd offered her. "You can return if you like," he said, "but keep everyone else away." 5 seconds later, the barn was empty of anyone whose name he didn't care to remember. He fixed Lindon with a stare, trying to beam the intensity of his attention into the boy. "I'm not used to asking this. What happened?" Lindon told him. Lindon told him everything. And Ethan found that he hadn't seen everything after all. A presence, an actual presence, if a simple one, created within the bounds of Cradle. Perhaps the first generation of Abidan had done as much, but no one since then. Not made through comprehension of the way, but through an unexpected combination of monarch-level resources, isolation, and sheer time. How often had similar miracles occurred but gone unnoticed? Even Northstrider himself might not recognize the true value of this spirit. Dross, a name which tickled Ethan's sense of irony. If not for Ethan, even Lindon and Dross themselves would assume that Dross was nothing but a slightly superior mind spirit. In fact, without careful nurturing of both spirit and host body, Dross might become nothing but a mind spirit. Presences in their initial stages were delicate, unstable, unreliable, and prone to evolution in undesirable directions. But to hear Lindon tell it, Dross had already touched upon the way, in a very limited fashion, certainly, and restricted by a critical lack of information. But when Dross searched his memories for solutions, his projections were bolstered by a touch of truth itself. That ability could stay as restricted as it was, or it could devolve into what it appeared to be, mere speculation from a mental construct. Unless someone developed it into the full, glorious weapon it could be. "Oh, we will make sure you grow," Ethan said fervently. "Yes, planted in the fertile soul of Lindon's spirit, we will grow you until you dwarf dread gods and tower over monarchs. The world itself will struggle to contain you." He was saying too much, but he couldn't stop himself. "When I fear I have set my sights too far, I find that I was not ambitious enough. Who will dare to hold us back when we have such an ally? Let the day you completed Northstrider's work be known as the day that the very foundations of history trembled." Well, so much for being careful under the eyes of a sage. If Akura Charity was listening, she would take his words as nothing but the ramblings and exaggerations of an excited Underlord. Ethan cackled at the thought. He intended to uproot the Order of Cradle itself, but until that moment he had only been planting seeds. Finally, he saw a single green shoot break the soil. One day it would grow to be a mighty tree on which monarchs and dread gods alike would break. The first tree in a forest. Ethan laughed and laughed. Appropriately, Dross laughed with him.